The letter Heinz Guderian wrote on October 4, 1941, was so alarming that it nearly didn't reach Hitler. The vast superiority of the Russian T-34 to our Panzer IV must be clearly emphasized. This from the man who invented modern tank warfare. The architect of Blitzkrieg was admitting the unthinkable. Germany had been outdesigned by the Soviets. June 23, 1941. The second day of Operation Barbarossa, somewhere in Soviet Ukraine. The German reconnaissance unit had advanced rapidly, encountering minimal resistance. Then they saw it. A strange, low-slung tank approaching through the morning mist. Its silhouette was unlike anything in German intelligence files. The Panzer III commander called for his gunner to engage. The first shell struck the Soviet tank at 800 meters, a perfect hit on the glacis plate. The shell ricocheted skyward with a metallic shriek. The Soviet tank kept advancing. Fire again. Another hit. Another ricochet. The distance closed to 400 meters. Then 200 meters. The German anti-tank crews joined the engagement. Their 37mm Paquet 36 guns, the standard German anti-tank weapon that had performed admirably in Poland and France, opened fire. Shell after shell struck the approaching tank. None penetrated. At 50 meters, Lieutenant Stup's Panzer III finally landed 5 direct hits with Panzergranate 40 armor-piercing rounds. The Soviet tank absorbed them all and continued its advance like, as one German report described it, an impregnable prehistoric monster. Then the Soviet tank's 76.2mm gun spoke. Lieutenant Stup's Panzer III exploded. Within hours, reports from across the front confirmed the pattern. German forces had encountered a new Soviet tank that rendered their entire anti-tank doctrine obsolete. It was designated T-34. What German intelligence officers and tank crews discovered over the following weeks would shatter their confidence in German technological superiority and force a complete rethinking of armored warfare. The realization came not as a sudden revelation, but as a creeping understanding that grew with each engagement. The Wehrmacht had entered the Soviet Union expecting an easy victory. Their panzer divisions had swept aside Polish, French and British forces with apparent ease. German tanks, Panzer IIs, the IIIs and IVs, had proven themselves the finest armored vehicles in Europe, or so they believed. By late June 1941, German tank commanders were submitting increasingly alarmed reports. The new Soviet tank possessed characteristics that seemed impossible to combine in a single vehicle. Armor. The T-34's frontal armor ranged from 45mm to 60mm thick, but it wasn't the thickness that confounded German gunners, it was the slope. The glacis plate sat at 60 degrees from vertical, effectively doubling its resistance to penetration. German engineers had traditionally favored vertical armor for ease of manufacture. The Soviets had discovered that sloped armor deflected shells that would otherwise penetrate. The German 37mm PK-36, nicknamed door knocker by frustrated crews, could not penetrate T-34 armor frontally at any range. Even the 50mm guns on later model Panzer IIIs struggled. Only flank shots, or the heavier 88mm anti-aircraft guns employed in a ground roll, could reliably destroy a T-34 mobility. The T-34 weighed 26.5 tons and was powered by a V2-34 diesel engine producing 500 horsepower. This gave it a top speed of 53 km per hour on roads, faster than any German tank. More importantly, its wide tracks and Christie suspension gave it superior cross-country performance. German tanks with their narrow tracks frequently bogged down in the soft soil, mud and snow of the Eastern Front. The T-34's wide tracks distributed its weight over a larger surface area, allowing it to traverse terrain that would immobilize. German armor, firepower. The T-34's F-34 76.2mm gun could destroy any German tank at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. German tank guns of 1941 struggled to penetrate T-34 armor even at point-blank range. The combination was devastating. The T-34 could engage German tanks from distances where German guns were ineffective, maneuver through terrain where German tanks became stuck, and shrug off hits that would cripple a panzer. On October 4, 1941, the 4th Panzer Division, part of General Heinz Guderian's legendary Panzer Group II, suffered a severe setback at Matsensk, near Oriel. A small force of T-34s ambushed the division, destroying numerous tanks and forcing a hasty withdrawal. Guderian, the architect of German armored warfare doctrine, and a man not given to exaggeration, immediately demanded an inquiry. His report was blunt. The vast superiority of the Russian T-34 to our Panzer IV must be clearly emphasized. This was an extraordinary admission from Germany's most successful tank commander. Guderian urged that the quickest solution was to produce direct copies of the T-34. In November 1941, a special Panzer Commission arrived on the Eastern Front to assess the situation. The commission included representatives from the Army Ordnance Office, the Armaments Ministry, tank designers, and the firms that manufactured German tanks. They examined captured T-34s in detail. What they discovered was both impressive and troubling. The T-34's design philosophy was fundamentally different from German approaches. German tanks were engineered to precise specifications, with careful attention to optimal performance characteristics. Every component was designed to function perfectly under ideal conditions. The T-34 was designed for reality. Its diesel engine was crude by German standards, with loose tolerances that would have horrified German engineers. But diesel fuel was safer than gasoline, less prone to fires when struck by enemy fire. The loose tolerances meant the engine could be manufactured quickly by semi-skilled workers and could operate in extreme cold without special preparations. The transmission was equally rough. German tankers who examined captured T-34s found that shifting gears sometimes required hitting the lever with a hammer. This seemed like poor engineering until they realized it was intentional. The tank was designed to be operated by minimally trained crews, many of whom had never seen a vehicle before conscription. The suspension used Christie torsion bars, a design the Soviets had purchased from American inventor J. Walter Christie. It was simple, effective, and easy to manufacture. The hull and turret were welded rather than bolted, using electric arc welding techniques that allowed rapid production. Early T-34s had crude welding that would have been rejected by German quality control, but they were functional and combat-ready. The Panzer Commission's report to Hitler was sobering. Germany faced an opponent with a tank superior to anything in the Wehrmacht's arsenal, and the Soviets were producing them in quantities that dwarfed German output. By June 1941, the Soviet Union had deployed approximately 1,000 T-34s, with production accelerating. German intelligence initially underestimated these numbers, assuming, like with other Soviet equipment, that technical sophistication would limit production. They were catastrophically wrong. The T-34 embodied Soviet industrial philosophy, adequate performance, brutal simplicity, mass production. It wasn't the best tank that could theoretically be built. It was the best tank that could be built by the millions. Our production statistics told a story that German planners found increasingly desperate to confront. 1941, 2,800 T-34s produced. 1942, 12,553 T-34s produced. 1943, 15,700 T-34s produced. 1944, 13,900 T-34s produced. 1945, 12,300 T-34s produced. Total wartime production, approximately 57,300 T-34s of all variants. For comparison, Germany produced 19,938 tanks of all types during the entire war. The disparity was even more striking when considering monthly production rates. By 1943, Soviet factories were completing 1,300 T-34s monthly, approximately 43 tanks per day, or 1.7 tanks every hour. The Panzer Commission recommended that Germany develop a new medium tank incorporating three key T-34 features: sloped armor, wide tracks for mobility, and a long-barreled high-velocity gun. Two designs were submitted. Daimler-Benz proposed a tank that looked remarkably similar to the T-34, with the turret mounted forward and a diesel engine. It was essentially a German copy of the Soviet Designmann Maschinenfabrik Augsburg-Nürnberg, proposed a more conventional design incorporating T-34 features into a traditionally German tank. Layout. Hitler initially favored the Daimler-Benz design, but was persuaded by his engineers that Mann's design would be easier to manufacture. with existing German industrial capabilities. More importantly, they argued that Germany could not quickly produce diesel engines and the specialized steel alloys the T-34 used. This was a damning admission. Germany, with its vaunted industrial sophistication, could not replicate the crude Soviet tank even if they wanted to. The MAN design entered production as the Panzer V Panther. It would be Germany's best tank of the war, but its development revealed the fundamental problem German industry faced. The Panther weighed 45 tons, nearly double the T-34's weight. It was equipped with a superb 75mm L70 gun and thick sloped armor. By all accounts, it was a magnificent piece of engineering. It was also complex, expensive, prone to mechanical failure, and difficult to manufacture. The prototype appeared in September 1942. Hitler demanded that 250 Panthers be ready by May 1943 for the summer offensive that would become the Battle of Kursk. Production began in January 1943. The first Panthers were rushed to the front for Kursk in July 1943. They suffered catastrophic mechanical failures. Approximately 90% experienced transmission failures within the first 1,500 kilometers. Engines caught fire. Final drives failed. Fuel pumps broke down. More Panthers were lost to mechanical breakdowns than enemy fire in their initial deployment. German engineers worked frantically to solve these problems. Improvements were implemented with the Panther ISFA in August 1943, and further refinements in the Panther SFG in 1944. By late 1944, the Panther had matured into a formidable weapon. Its 75mm gun could penetrate Soviet armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Its frontal armor was nearly impervious to the T-34's 76mm gun, but it was too little, too late. Between 1943 and 1945, Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panthers. During the same period, the Soviet Union produced 29,400 T-34-85s, the upgraded T-34 with an 85mm gun. The production ratio was nearly 5-to-1 in Soviet favor. Strategic calculations were brutal. Even if a Panther destroyed 4 T-34s before being disabled, the Soviets still came out ahead. Field Marshal Ewald von Kleist, who commanded panzer forces on the Eastern Front, was asked after the war about the best tank he encountered. His response was unequivocal. The finest tank in the world was how he described the T-34. Guderian, in his post-war memoirs, wrote extensively about the T-34's impact. He acknowledged that it forced Germany to completely rethink tank development. The Panther, Tiger, and all subsequent German tank designs were direct responses to the shock of encountering the T-34. What made this admission particularly significant was that it came from men who had pioneered armored warfare. Guderian had written the book literally on panzer tactics. German tank commanders were considered the finest in the world, yet they freely admitted that a Soviet design had blindsided them. The T-34's influence extended beyond the Eastern Front. When German Panthers appeared in Normandy in 1944, Allied tank crews faced the weapons that had been developed in response to Soviet armor. The T-34 had forced German engineers to create tanks that now threatened American and British forces. The story of the T-34 is fundamentally a story about design philosophy under the constraints of total war. German engineers approached tank design as an optimization problem. They sought the best possible performance in each category: armor protection, mobility, firepower, crew comfort, mechanical reliability. This produced excellent tanks, but at the cost of manufacturing complexity and production time. Soviet engineers approached tank design as a manufacturing problem. They sought adequate performance in each category, combined with maximum producibility. This produced tanks with notable flaws, but in quantities that overwhelmed their opponents. The T-34 had significant problems that German propaganda and some post-war Soviet accounts downplayed. Vision. The commander and driver had poor visibility when buttoned up, relying on narrow vision slits and low-quality periscopes. German tanks had far superior optics. Crew ergonomics. The T-34 was cramped and uncomfortable. American analysts who examined captured examples were amazed that crews could operate in winter gear. Communications. Early T-34s lacked radios. Platoons followed the leader and communicated with flags. This severely limited tactical coordination. Quality control. Wartime production T-34s were crudely finished. Some were delivered without paint. Some lacked driver seats. Welding quality was often poor. But these flaws didn't matter as much as German planners expected. In sustained combat, a T-34's weaknesses in crew comfort and visibility were less important than its ability to absorb hits, penetrate enemy armor, and be rapidly replaced when destroyed. The mathematics of attrition warfare favored mass production over perfection. By 1943, Soviet factories had refined production to remarkable efficiency. The labor hours required to build a T-34 dropped from 8,000 hours in 1941 to 3,700 hours in 1943. Costs fell correspondingly. This was achieved through ruthless simplification. Any modification that didn't improve combat effectiveness or reduce production time was rejected. Rounded turrets gave way to hexagonal turrets because they were faster to weld. Rubber-rimmed road wheels were replaced with all-steel wheels when rubber became scarce. German engineers watching this evolution from captured examples and intelligence reports recognized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Industrial warfare at a scale Germany could not match. The total weight of all T-34s produced during the war exceeded the combined weight of all German tanks. Germany's most produced aircraft, the Bf-109, Germany's entire submarine fleet, and Germany's two largest battleships. This represented the impossible arithmetic Germany faced. Even with superior tactics, training, and individual vehicle performance, German forces were being buried under an avalanche of Soviet production. The T-34's legacy extended far beyond World War II. It established principles that influenced tank design globally. Sloped armor became universal in post-war tank design. Diesel engines became standard for tanks. Design for manufacturability became a key consideration. The medium tank concept, mobility and firepower over heavy armor, dominated until the main battle tank emerged. The T-34 served in over 40 countries and fought in conflicts from Korea, 1950-53, to the Arab-Israeli Wars, 1967, Tank 73 to Yemen, 2015. Its chassis spawned dozens of variants, including self-propelled guns, recovery vehicles, and engineering vehicles. Total production of all T-34 variants from 1940 to 1958 exceeded 84,000 vehicles, making it the most produced tank of World War II and the second most produced tank in history, after its descendant, the T-54-55. For German engineers and tank crews, the T-34 represented a harsh education in the realities of industrial warfare. It taught them that technological sophistication without manufacturing capacity was a recipe for defeat. German Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, reflecting on the war, wrote that Germany's defeat was inevitable once the Soviet Union survived the initial invasion. The T-34 was a key reason for that survival. When German forces reached the outskirts of Moscow in December 1941, they encountered fresh Soviet forces equipped with T-34s pulled from Siberian factories. These tanks played a crucial role in the counteroffensive that drove German forces back from the capital. At Stalingrad in 1942-43, T-34s supported the Soviet forces that encircled and destroyed the German 6th Army. Factory No. 183, relocated to Nizhny Tagil in the Urals, was producing tanks that reached the front within days. At Kursk in 1943, the largest tank battle in history, T-34s formed the backbone of Soviet armored forces. Though they suffered heavy losses, they were replaced faster than Germany could replace its losses. By 1944-45, as Soviet forces pushed westward, T-34s were being produced at such rates that entire armies could be equipped with them. German forces, despite fielding technically superior Panthers and Tigers, were simply overwhelmed. The story of the T-34 is ultimately about the triumph of pragmatic engineering over perfectionism in total war. It's about recognizing that good enough available now and producible by the millions beats excellent available later in limited quantities. German engineers had created magnificent tanks. The Panther, Tiger and King Tiger were engineering marvels. But they had created them for the wrong war. They designed for a short, decisive conflict, where quality would overwhelm quantity. Soviet engineers designed for the war they were actually fighting, a brutal, prolonged struggle where the side that could replace losses fastest would prevail. The T-34 taught German engineers this lesson through hard experience. By the time they adapted, creating the Panther, improving production methods, simplifying designs, it was too late. Soviet production capacity was too far ahead. The mathematics of attrition could not be overcome. In post-war reunions, German tank veterans spoke with grudging respect about the T-34. They acknowledged that while individual German tanks were superior, the T-34 and what it represented, Soviet industrial might, had been decisive. One former Panzer commander summed it up: "We had better tanks. They had more tanks." In the end, that was what mattered. The T-34 wasn't perfect. It wasn't the most comfortable, the most reliable, or the most sophisticated tank of World War II. But it was the most important tank of the war, because it could be produced in quantities that allowed the Soviet Union to absorb horrific losses and continue fighting. German engineers who examined their first T-34 in 1941 recognized they were seeing something revolutionary. They understood immediately that this tank represented a design philosophy they hadn't considered and a production capacity they couldn't match. That recognition came too late to change the outcome, but it taught lessons that shaped armored warfare for generations to come. The T-34 remains a monument to functional engineering, not the pursuit of perfection, but the achievement of effectiveness at scale. It proved that in total war, the adequate weapon delivered in overwhelming numbers beats the excellent weapon delivered in limited quantities. That lesson, learned at terrible cost by German tank crews facing wave after wave of T-34s, remains relevant today. The finest tank in the world, as Field Marshal von Kleist admitted, was the one that could be built by the tens of thousands while still performing its mission. The German engineers who first examined a captured T-34 in 1941 were looking at their defeat. They just didn't fully realize it yet.